Hi, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here with some holiday inspiration, and today I'll be creating a card using one of our new slapstick cling stamps, and this is called Santa's Visit. And I really love this stamp because it's sort of like one of those all-in-one stamps. You get the entire scene, the background, the foreground, everything all with one stamp. And I'll also be using our banner sentiments and the coordinating creative die set, Birds and Banners. And here's a list just real quick of all the supplies I'll be using today, but I just wanted to pop this up real fast and let you know that I will put this back up on screen at the very end of the video, so if you need to look at it more in detail, you can just hit the pause button when it comes up at the very end of the video. So to begin, I'm working in my stamp positioning tool, the Misty by My Sweet Petunia, and I'm going to begin by inking up the entire stamp using smoky gray VersaFine ink. And the reason I chose this ink is that it's pretty light colored, and it is also a waterproof ink once dry. And the main area I wanted to capture with this is that sketchy sort of lined area on the sky, and I wanted that to be waterproof so I didn't have to worry about the stamping bleeding when I was coloring on top of it. Now I cleaned off my stamp and I'm going to begin applying color to the image, and I am using Tombow dual brush pens. You could also use another water-based type marker like a distress marker to do this. And I will have all of the exact colors used listed at the end of the video. And I'm just coloring right on top, working in small sections, and then stamping it down. And that's the beauty of using the stamp positioning tools, that you can just keep working in small sections, applying different colors, and there's no time crunch. You can just take your time in coloring in the image, but doing it by stamping. So I'm using some gray here on the fence, and it's just fun to kind of sit back and color in this way. And I am stamping onto Arches 140-pound hot press watercolor paper. And hot press watercolor paper has a smoother finish, which works great for adding in and stamping with such a detailed stamp. It just captures the details a little bit easier. But because it is a watercolor paper, I can go back in and paint and add water on top of it once I am done doing all of the stamping. And when I'm coloring with the markers, I just kind of turn the brush tip so that I can easily apply it right onto the stamp and get a nice thick coat of ink right on there. I'm just getting the Santa here with a very dark gray. And I do a couple impressions usually just to darken up the color. I'll use some green here on some of the trees. Now, the places where I have used the marker ink, when I go back in and add water and do some painting, that marker will reconstitute and you can blend it right on the page. So there's pros and cons to that. It's great because you can just blend it and give a nice watercolor look without putting more watercolors on top. But you also have to be careful if you're coloring something right next to it that you don't touch it or it will start to bleed out. Now when I start doing my painting, you will see that I do that, and if you just have a dry paper towel handy, you can dab it right up. But I do like that I've used that VersaFine ink up on the sky and on the houses. Those were two places I didn't want to have to worry about it bleeding from underneath when I added the paint, which you will see in just a bit. So it's fun to combine different mediums, ink pads, and different types of inks when you're working with this stamp. Here I'm just getting some of the sort of grassy area down here. Now I used a color, it's actually 837 is the number, and it has a reddish tint to it, which is really fun. When I go back in with my paints, I will use some yellows and browns and a little touch of orange, and when those all mix together, you get a nice warm color. And I like that to tie into the color that I will be painting the moon. Now I've just picked up that VersaFine ink pad again, and I'm just turning it sort of on its side and trying to ink up the houses. Again, now I remove this from my stamp positioning tool and I'm ready to paint. So I'll be doing a couple of different ways of painting. So right here, because this was stamped using the marker ink, I can go in with just a wet paintbrush, not too wet, and just blend it right there on the page, only applying water, and that's just reconstituting that marker ink. And you don't have to worry too much about these little branches here. Basically, the stamping is sufficient, but there's just a few places I wanted to blend it out, mostly on the larger parts of the branches. I'm doing the same thing over here on the fence post that was stamped with the marker ink, so I can just go in with water on my brush and just lightly paint over that to give it a bit of a smoother finish. And this also gives it more of a painted look, so it looks like you just sat down and painted the scene and that it wasn't something that you stamped and colored in. I'm blending out this tree area a bit, again just with water on my brush. And here I'm just going to touch just a little bit of that grassy area. You'll see how it gets a nice red look. And I decided to do more of blending with that once I pull in my inks. So to do my painting, I'm going to use Distress Ink Re-Inkers. And I'm going to use them as a watercolor. So I just put a tiny little drop onto an old acrylic block. And I can pick that up. I find I have more control with using these than I do with the watercolor. I also just really like the Distress line of colors, and by using the re-inker, it's just very, very vibrant. And I'm just going to mostly paint and color things in. I'm not doing a lot of shading. Most of that is just built right into the stamp. In some areas here, like on the houses, I'm painting over the VersaFine ink, so that's not going to do any blending. It's just going to allow me to paint right over the top. In some areas here, I'm just adding some shadow to the snow. So I put down a little bit of my ink and then blend it with water. And this is such a relaxing stamp to work with. I actually turned on some Christmas music when I was working on this and just sat back and painted. It's just a really fun image. It's peaceful, but it's also really festive with that Santa up there, and it's just fun. And when you're done, you have the whole scene finished just with the one stamp. So saying that, I'll just turn on some Christmas tunes here, and I will be back in just a bit once things are painted. So now that I have everything colored in, I just am going in with a white gel pen in a few places where things started to bleed and blend a little more, or I was a little too heavy-handed with my paint. And it's usually in those snowy areas that happened, and I just color with a gel pen, sometimes pat it with my finger to blend it down into the background. So snowy scenes are actually very forgiving to paint and color in because you can always just add some snowflakes or fix most of it up with a gel pen. So I went ahead and trimmed down my panel, and I decided it kind of reminded me of like a really old vintage styled postcard or Christmas card. And so I decided to just go with that and do a bunch of inking around the edges. So I'm starting with Memento Peanut Brittle ink, and I like to put this down as I think it just warms up the browns that I'll be putting on top of it. Next, I'll add Memento Toffee Crunch, and I'm just applying this with an ink blending tool that has a foam pad. And working around the edges of the card, but most of it going down at the bottom portion of the card. And next I'm using some Gathered Twigs Distress ink. And I chose these inks primarily because they're the colors of brown that I really like to layer on top of each other. I'm also going to ink this back corner because I will be folding that down just for an added detail up on the upper left. And then this is Memento Rich Cocoa ink. So I'm applying this but not going in quite as far as I did with the other colors. Now when I folded this back, I realized I had a little red splatter, of course, right where I wanted to have that folded back and showing. So I thought, well, I'll just go with it and add a bunch more splatters. So I picked up my Gathered Twigs Distress ink re-inker and splattered it on and dried that. And then to fold this back and keep it that way, I just put a little foam square there, and then I add a touch of my liquid glue and fold it down and just hold it till it starts to stay. And that's a good way if you like to add that detail to your cards. It's just a really easy way to do that. So to finish off the card, I stamp my sentiment onto the coordinating banner die, and I love how that pulls that crisp white sort of snow look down into that bottom portion of the card. I'm going to put a little double-sided tape up on this corner, and then I have this stamped and inked panel, and I'll put a little bit of tape here, and that will just peek out behind that corner. Now I can take this panel and mat it and add it to my note card. And the card is finished. Here's another look at the finished card. I thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to our channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, Instagram, our blog, and our website, and I will link to all of those down in the YouTube description box below. And here's that list of supplies that I promised. Thanks for watching.